You're listening to the Good Food CFO podcast, where we focus on financial strategies for building a profitable food business. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Ellen Rawley. She is the founder of Ellen Rawley Creative Strategy, through which she helps farms and food businesses launch and grow profitable product lines. Her go-to-market services include organic and food safety compliance, grant writing, and product strategy. Ellen first witnessed the impact that selling directly to consumers can have on a farm while living with organic rice farmers in Thailand. She then traveled the world to research values-based marketplaces as both a Richter Research grantee and Ford Foundation fellow. Since founding her business in 2016, Ellen has secured $800,000 in grant funding for budding farm businesses and helped launch countless products, many of which have been featured in Martha Stewart's American Made Shop, Food and Wine magazine, and Oprah's list of favorite things. Her work has been recognized through speaking engagements with the Stonebarns Center for Agriculture, the Food Craft Institute, and the California State Grange. And now she's joining me here on the Good Food CFO podcast to discuss organic certification. Is it right for your farm or your good food business? What are the costs and the benefits of the certification? And how can you make the most of your investment in becoming organically certified once you've got it? We've got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Hey, Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to dive into this conversation about the costs and benefits of organic certification and how good food business owners can make the most of it. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, Sarah, it's great to be here.
Before we dive into the meat of our conversation today, can you share with our listeners a little bit about the work that you do surrounding organic certification I know you work with both farmers and food business owners.
Yes, I do. So I work with farmers and food business owners really to launch products that are value added. So have some sort of way to make more on the marketplace than a traditional product. So the compliance piece kind of fits in with that, working both with farmers and with food businesses to get them certified, to get new products added to their certification, and to kind of figure out all the record keeping pieces that keep it going.
Super excited to talk about that in detail today. I think organic certification is one of those things where we know there is an inherent value, right? Because the certification speaks to consumers. It tells them something very specific about your brand and sort of the level of trust that they can have in terms of how it was produced. But I think there's a lot of mystery, if you will, surrounding how you get certified, what it takes to be certified, what the costs are for the initial certification, and also to maintain that certification. So why don't we start with the benefits? Can you talk a little bit about the benefits? And our listeners are both farmers who produce products and also non-farmers who are creating products. So you've got kind of a broad audience here today, and I know you can speak directly to both of them. So can you talk about the benefits of certifying your product?
Yeah. Well, hi, farmers and food business entrepreneurs. It's great to speak with you today, along with Sarah. The biggest benefit, I think you really touched on, Sarah, brilliantly, is that when you have the organic seal, it gives the customer something to trust in beyond just your word. And I think that gets more and more important as you get farther and farther away from being right in front of the customer. So I always kind of see it as, if you're selling your wares at the farmer's market and you have a really, really, really strong connection with your customer and have the time to explain and have the time to build that relationship, then maybe it's a little less important. But as you start being on shelves, or if you're selling into restaurants that have policies around having organic produce, these things then kind of layer on a way for you to explain your values to your customer and not just have them, take your word for it, but they have then the assurity that you're being checked, that this body is really making sure that you do stand for what you say you stand for. So it kind of is like, it gives you that like Greek chorus, if you will, of voices backing the integrity of your product.
Yeah, I love that. Is there any data surrounding whether or not an organic certification may increase your sales, or if the organic, market in general is growing. Is there any data on that you're aware of?
Yeah. So, well, that is I love the first part of that question because, I want to look at if there is data that compares someone who didn't go organic versus did. That would be an amazing study. I don't know one off the top of my head, but there is the Organic Trade Association. They do a lot of data collection around the organic logo, what organic means to customers, the organic market. And so they're a great wealth of information there. And it's definitely something that has been steadily growing. I've been probably working in organic for about 10 years. And typically, the organic market is growing faster than just the traditional grocery market. So I pulled up a few pieces of data for today. And in 2020, for example, organics grew 12.4% to $61.9 billion compared to 5% in 2019. So the thing that also showed that even during a pandemic, organic continued to grow, where you would think, organics usually at a higher price point, possibly there'd be a slump as people were worried about income, et cetera. But it did show to have strength even through that type of situation. And really the majority is produce. Produce has always been the strongest sector, or like the strongest part of the organic market, but other categories also are showing to grow quickly. Things like flours, baked goods, flour as in wheat flour, not flours, and spices. Spices actually had 51% growth in 2020 in terms of organic. So there is definitely a very healthy, consistent growth in that market.
Really fascinating. Thank you for sharing the specific, types of products that they're seeing growth into. I don't think I would have guessed spices.
Yeah,
Would have
I
been
know.
on
I
that
was
list.
surprised by that one too.
So we know that there are benefits for having the certification, sort of going through the process. Once someone, and we'll talk about how you can achieve that certification, but once someone has it, right? So you've got the seal, it's on your product, right? How do you make the most of it? Because as we're going to talk about the dollars and cents, associated with it. So when we are investing money, what are some tips you can provide for both farmers and food producers to maximize the certification?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, show it on your product. You said that in the question, but I'm always shocked by people who go for the organic, go through the trouble of organic, and then kind of hide it somewhere on the back of their product instead of right there in the front. So
Right.
If you meet the organic qualified level of certification, definitely call out in the product name that the product is organic. Definitely use the logos. Those logos, they do resonate with customers. There are customers who are scanning to see the logo. So you want to make sure that you have the logo up there in the front. The regulations also allow you to have other statements on your packaging, including calling out specific organic ingredients and percent content claims. All of those are great ways through your packaging. So there's all these packaging ways to do it. And then when you get certified, also legally, unless you're certified, you are not supposed to be using the word organic on your website and your materials. You can only really use it in your ingredient deck. So if you do go through the certification, use the organic claim in those places as well. On the front page of your website, have something about the fact that you're organic, and have a link to a page on your website that says, what does that mean for us? And go in more detail about, here's the practices that we take that take us extra time and money, but that prove to you what our values and integrity are. So have that on your website. You can definitely, if you're at the farmer's market, you can have the logo right there up on your sign so that if customers are walking by, they see, oh, that farm is an organic farm versus, they're selling tomatoes, they're selling tomatoes, they're selling tomatoes. Which way am I wandering? If someone sees a big organic logo, that could attract them over to your stall. So really just using it front facing as much as possible so that you're telling that story over and over and over again. I know when we represent our brands, it sounds like we're just on repeat, and you're like, oh my God, people must be so bored of hearing me say, and all my Instagram posts are organic veggies and like jarred products, but they really aren't. It's really just repetition is one of the keys of marketing. Just use it, use it, use it. Keep reminding people and qualify it. What does organic mean to you? That's where in your website or in more detail, you can really call out, here's what that means on a day-to-day level so they can see the actual actions you're taking.
I love that tip for a couple of reasons. So, as many of our listeners know, in sort of my previous work life before starting this career, I was a buyer, and I focused on sourcing local, sustainable, and organic, produce in particular for the business that I was working for at the time. And we would buy certified organic produce, but we also worked with a lot of farmers who didn't get certified. For lack of funding in some cases, for lack of the ability to kind of do the paperwork. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But those farmers, as well as the organic farmers that were certified, were often doing more, right? Or sort of doing better, if you will, than what the certification requires. So I love the call out to qualify what does the organic certification mean specifically for your business. Because if you're not using any types of chemicals at all, for example, on your farm, even if they were certified organic, that adds an extra layer of, I think, benefit to your business and to your consumer as well.
Yeah. If you're making your own compost, that could be on that subpage of your website. What that means, that you're not trucking in compost, you're actually making it yourself, how that impacts the environment and just the, global warming, et cetera. Like you can get into the details. And I think it's great to do that, like on a subpage of your website or in some marketing materials. But what the logo does is it creates then a really simple thing up front, because you don't want to put all that on your packaging or it's going to overwhelm people. But so you have that simplicity of the logo where you don't have to explain everything that you're doing for people to buy into you. And then you also have the opportunity later to really showcase more of what that means to you. And you brought up being a buyer. So I just want to say also another place to put it is your sell sheet. If you are selling into wholesale, make sure that it's not just on the little photo of your package that's on the sell sheet. Make sure it's also just like the big logo, loud and proud on the sell sheet.
So we're talking about, farmers, and we're talking about producers. And I think for our listeners, it might be important to clarify any differences that may exist, perhaps wherever necessary. I was going to say during the certification process, but I'm not the expert in this. You are. So what are some important things to call out for, any of the farmers that are listening, any of the producers that are listening, and any of those farmer/producers as well? I'm super interested in this.
So there's a few different kind of subsets of the type of certification you would get. And you picked out the main two, I'd say, are growers and handlers. Okay. There's also, dairy, wineries. They each have some of their own forms to fill out, honestly, and just things you have to think about in the process. But we'll stick with growers and handlers because that's kind of the majority of people. Yeah. Growers, the big things with growing are going to be, well, with both, really, it's tracing. So for growers, for example, that's going to mean when you get inspected, they're going to want to see that the seed you purchased, when you seeded it, when you transplanted it, when you harvested it, when you sold it. Basically what they're looking for is, if you said you sold 100 pounds of tomatoes, did you actually have enough seed and do the actions that it took to have that much tomatoes? They're basically looking like, did you supplement with some other tomatoes that you bought? Same thing with a producer, with a handler. So a manufacturer or processor, they're looking at that you received ingredients that were organic, that you made the batch, that you sold it, and that all of that lines up. Which for some people, as a compliance person, I have to say that should be part of your systems in case there's ever a recall or anything else. You want to be able to do that tracking anyway. But I know for a lot of small producers, they aren't necessarily dialed into all that tracking without going for certification. With farming, there's going to be some things around your compost, if you compost, around the inputs that you use. Those are some of the big categories there. Around the seeds, you don't have to only buy organic seed, but they want you buying organic seed where possible. Same thing with bulbs, etc. And then also, of course, your materials, what you're spraying, and that it's something that's approved. And then with the processors, the big things are the formulas have to fit within certain you can use some non-organic ingredients, but it has to be on a list of approved non-organic ingredients for use in an organic product. They're looking at your pest control materials, the materials used to sanitize, and your labels, making sure that your labels have certain very minimal, but certain things in the right places. Those are the main kind of pieces.
Super helpful and interesting. Things I wouldn't have thought of, or like your pest control, which makes perfect sense now that you've said it out loud, and the way that you're cleaning the surfaces on which you are producing your product. So one of those light bulb moments where it's like, oh, obviously, but never would have thought about it. I was always just thinking about the ingredients that are being utilized. I know that there are, I'm thinking about CCOF, which I believe is a certifier. I used to be such a nerd about this stuff, but it's been so long since I've dug into it. Is there one certification company or board, or are there many across states, within states? Like, can you help us understand who do we go to get certified?
I love this part. I love the history of how these things come together. So it's a little confusing because back in the day when organic first started, it was really consumer driven and farmer driven. They wanted a way to talk about these things. So these different certifying agencies, you mentioned one, CCOF, there's Oregon TILF is one that a lot of people know about. There's one in Maine. It's all these smaller farmers, very much usually state. CCOF is California originally. That came up with, okay, we're going to have a logo and we're going to have a standard for what this logo means. So that's how it started. Then the USDA got involved, and I don't know my dates, but it's in my recent lifetime. The USDA got involved and decided, okay, we're going to have one standard because all these, it just different standards were stronger or looser. So they created one national standard. So now it's actually like a legal definition. You hear about these things like natural doesn't have a legal definition. Organic does. This is now regulated by the USDA. So there's a standard. The standard does change. It's a living standard. So there's a national organic standard board that's made up of farmers, of consumer interest representatives that meet to decide on things like what non-organic ingredients can be in an organic product. So you as the public can go to these meetings. That's the kind of thing that I do for fun. And you can have input on these things, but it's all regulated nationally. But these certifying agencies still exist because it's not the USDA that's going to come inspect you. You're inspected by the third-party certification agency. So it's not like, so for example, a lot of your listeners might know about FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is over all processors. In that case, it's actually an FDA inspector that would inspect you. In this case, it's not the USDA, it's whichever third-party agency you choose to sign up with. And they're basically certifying you to that national standard. So now there's a lot of different agencies, but there aren't, like I said, in that beginning time where there was some that were looser standards, some that were stronger standards, they're now all certifying to the same USDA standard.
This may be a strange question, but is there a certifying organization, like in California, I feel like CCOF still holds weight. Like when I see that, it has meaning to me. Is there anything you think is important to share around that or around selecting?
Definitely. So I think what you're saying is definitely true. So part of deciding which agency to go with is understanding what the different symbols mean to your consumer. So I guess to back up a second, there's kind of 3 levels of organic on the processor end. There's kind of 3 levels of organic, how organic your product could be. And I won't get into all those details, but on 2 of them, you can have the USDA logo and your certifier logo. On one of them, you can just have your certifier logo. If you have an organic product, what meets the organic guideline, you could have the USDA logo. So then it doesn't really matter maybe which certifier, but there is, like you said, there are some logos that, because back in the day, there were those stronger and less strong standards that have more consumer confidence in them. Whether that's really misguided at this point or not is another conversation, but it exists. So there's that. There's thinking like, if I used this certifier logo, would people recognize it? Doesn't mean anything. Because there's a lot of certifiers that honestly I'm still learning about that are very small and don't have that much recognition in the marketplace. Then another piece is, there's larger certifier agencies and smaller ones. Smaller ones are like a little bit more handheld. You can just like email the whole team, where as you get bigger, you have, a specialist and they want you to submit things through a portal. So do you like that? Or do you want the efficiency or really just the handheldness? And then different certifiers charge differently. So then there's that question as well, as how do you see yourself growing? And then how is that going to change how much you pay over time? I feel like those are kind of 3 big things to think about when you're picking an agency to go with.
So you mentioned cost. I want to dive into some of the fees. This is a financially focused podcast, and I know that it's impossible for you to give us super specific information, but I think any details or insights that you can provide to the listeners is going to be super helpful. So let's talk with what I assume is like the first step, which is maybe applying for it. But can you maybe walk us through the process as best you can and just kind of call out where we're going to incur some fees and what that might look like for folks?
Yeah, definitely. So this would, of course, just caveat, be slightly different depending on which certifier, because we just talked about they have different ways of charging. So the beginning of the process is your own work or working with someone like me to figure out what about our operation is in compliance and what's going to need to change for us to be in compliance. So for example, if you're a farmer looking at your inputs, if you're spraying certain sprays, are those actually allowed under organic or are they not? And if not, what are the options to switch to? And are those options actually work for you and your farm? So there's kind of that whole piece. If you're a processor, maybe you'd have to reformulate a few products. Can you do that? And you still like the flavor and you still like the consistency, et cetera. So you kind of have to do that. And that's part of the application process, because the application, in my experience, are very much tailored to helping you think through those things. And then you'll have to make those decisions. So there's like the time and energy of preparing the application. Then you submit your application. There's usually an application fee. And then what goes on with the application, they review it. Then they come out and they inspect you, and they inspect the kitchen or they inspect your farm, and they ask you lots of questions and run through all the things that they're checking for. That inspection is charged by the hour. In the case of CCOF, they charge by the hour of the inspector. And so obviously the more prepared you are, the cheaper it is. The less prepared you are, the longer it takes, the more expensive it is. So that process of the application fee and the inspection for CCOF, they give you the guideline that it's for small farmers, it's about $750 for the first year. And for food processors, it's about $1,250 for the first year. So that would be that application, the inspection, and then your fee, when it comes to CCOF, which honestly, most certifiers I've found now have switched to this, is it's graduated based on what they call your organic production value. So the organic production value is, if you're a farm, it's the amount of organic sales you had minus the seed and the feed.
Right.
Any organic seed and feed. You deduct that out. For a processor, it's your organic sales of finished product minus the cost of the organic ingredients. So that's your organic production value.
So for the first year, just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. So that value for the CCOF that you just stated includes the application fee, the inspection, kind of the typical charge for inspection, and then the estimated annual fee?
Yes.
However, your specific annual fee could be different based on how much you sell. Got it. Okay.
So that's why they said that's the typical for a small farm. They're kind of estimating.
Okay.
And then in later years, so every about 18 months, 12 to 18 months, you get re-inspected. So you're supposed to get inspected every year.
Okay.
So every year your continuing cost is the cost of that inspection again. And with CCOF, it's hourly. So every year it's the more prepared you are, the cheaper it is. And that they're inspecting all those records I talked about. They're doing an in-out audit. So they want to say organic sugar, show me that the amount you received in the year and the amount you used in the year, and make sure those numbers line up, the amount you have left over in inventory. So it's like, you really have to have the systems so that when inspection time comes around, you can actually pull that information and have a quick inspection. And then you have your annual fee. So the recurring costs are that annual fee and the annual inspection fee. And they estimated that for a small farm, that's $375 to $575 after the first year. And for food processors, it's $950 after the first year. So it goes down a little bit because you don't have that application and the original inspection, which might take longer. Now, other things are if you add acreage with CCOF, there's like a fee for adding acreage, because anything they have to basically review and approve to add to your OSP, your organic system plan, because there's going to be man hours to do it. So if you add a product as a processor, it's $100 to review. If you add acreage, I forget the exact amount. If you adding materials doesn't give you, if you add like a fertilizer, that doesn't add any fees. If you add, for example, if you're a processor and you get ingredients from someone who's not certified themselves, so you purchase sugar from ABC distributor, who they buy it from someone who's actually certified organic. But you're not buying it from the certified organic manufacturer, you're buying it from ABC distributor. They're considered a non-organic handler. So you have a fee that you have to pay to have them on your organic system plan. So there are these other fees. So it's hard to give just like one base level, here's what it's going to cost you. But yeah, that's kind of some of the fees.
A couple of things I'm taking away from it is the initial fees that you're absolutely going to incur. The fact that, as you said, the more prepared you are, the less expensive, some of those fees are, both in that first year, but also ongoing. If you've got the systems, you're really clear and tracking the information that they want specifically in an easy to understand way, that's going to help you out, both I think in remaining certified, right? But also in keeping your costs down. I think just knowing that there are other fees that can be incurred for a variety of things is helpful to know, like, okay, that's something we have to look into, right? Before we go about this. The one follow-up question I have for you is, do you have any information on how the annual fee is charged? Like here in California, the LLC fee, you have to estimate. Okay, I estimate my company is going to make this much money this year, and you pay that tax fee in advance. How does it work for organic certifications?
There are some certifiers that they have flat fees. Typically, one that was a very big was QAI, which you'll see that logo a lot on bigger organic ingredients. They just switched to a graduated fee. But for large companies, a lot of times they like the flat fee because it's not going to keep going up as they have really big jumps in sales. But for many certifiers, we're talking about these graduated fees. It is self-reported. So you say, here's how, like they ask you, what was your organic production value? So you take the amount of sales that you had and you deduct the amount of organic ingredients you purchased and you report to them, this was my organic production value. And then they charge you the fee that's related to it.
So it's based on like actual numbers, not estimated numbers, which is helpful. Amazing. Yeah. Okay.
Just want to say one more point to that, because you brought it up in your follow-up, is I think one of the largest costs, but it's not necessarily like charged to you, is the cost of the labor of keeping up the records.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who really doesn't keep records at this point, and you kind of have an email form from, as you get stuff in, you have like emails from all your vendors at some point of an invoice, but it's all like, and if I asked you for a specific invoice, it might take you 30 minutes to find it, then there's a gap there. And you really have to think, okay, it's going to be that when you get an ingredient in, you're going to be taking that ingredient and you're going to be taking the invoice and you're going to be filing it, and you're going to be creating a lot code for that ingredient so that you can record it on your batch record. And you need a lot code for that batch of product, which then gets put on your outgoing invoices. So that is a very kind of boilerplate system for mid to large manufacturing, are very used to doing that kind of thing. But for small folks, just, I feel like that ends up being the biggest cost, is having someone on staff who's doing that work.
And I'll add to that as we see businesses go from initial beginnings, kind of year 1, year 2, and maybe selling farmers market or selling super local, as you want to get bigger and you want to start selling into more places, it is best practice to be tracking that information. So, I agree with you. There is cost related to that. But I think in the long run, whether you're getting certified organic or not, it is a good idea to implement those systems. We're talking about costs. So we've got this, the initial fees, the annual fees, the internal costs of, keeping the right records and stuff. But I want to remind our listeners that there is benefit financially to having this certification. One of those is that you can typically charge a higher price for a certified product. And the other is that this part of the food industry is growing. So there are benefits, but on top of these costs of actually, getting certified and remaining certified, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some additional work that comes along with making the most of this certification. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, you're definitely right. There is this benefit, and the benefit really takes marketing and packaging. And those things, I know, are something that can very often be hard to invest in, to find the funds needed to invest in. So that's why another thing that I do in Ellen Rawley Creative Strategy is write a specific grant that the USDA Rural Development has every year that helps actually match funds for marketing, for packaging, for co-packer fees, for different types of working capital that come along with having a value-added product. It's called the Value-Added Producer Grant. The thing that's really awesome about it, that really ties into our conversation, is often when we think of the word value added, we think of someone who's growing, say, tomatoes, and then turns it into a jarred tomato sauce. But the USDA-RD actually defines it also as someone who is growing tomatoes and selling them organically, because of what you just said, because organic is a value add to your tomatoes. You're able to add value on the marketplace just by marketing and selling organic versus conventional. So to get that, all the things we were talking about, you actually have to have, say, marketing campaigns. You have to have packaging that calls it out. And this grant helps match funds to be able to afford those types of projects.
Amazing. Is this grant, are both farmers and producers who are not farmers eligible for this grant, or is it just one kind of sector of the audience that we're talking with today?
It's just one sector of the audience. So
Okay.
It's people who grow and then sell as organic, or grow and then they even turn it into, even if it wasn't organic, which we won't go into because that will get the scope of this conversation too wide, but people who grow things and turn them into something else are eligible.
Well, that's amazing. There's so many listeners. We've got jam producers who are also farmers. We've got dairy farmers who are creating amazing, cheeses and other types of dairy products. So this is exciting. So for those of you listening, I'm excited for you to share a little bit more about this grant. What do we need to know?
Yeah. So the value added producer grant is something I'm super passionate about as well. It makes me very excited. So it is about to come up again. It usually gets announced at the end of December, the last few years. You have 3 months to write it. Applications will be due at the end of March, and then winners will be announced in like October-ish of 2022 is the next grant cycle. The thing that's amazing about it is that it covers working capital. As you know, like that's the stuff that's really hard to get covered in any way. And so it covers the things that really help you build a brand and build recognition. And it doesn't have to just be direct to consumer. It can be wholesale. It can be that you sell to restaurants. It just really has to be a project that is both increasing your revenues and increasing your customer base. There's 2 tiers of funding. There's some funding with a more simplified application that you can get up to $50,000. And then there's a more rigorous application that needs a third-party feasibility study with it that you can ask for up to $250,000. So it's a really amazing opportunity. And I've noticed I've written 4 grant cycles now, and I've really seen a dedication to getting funds to smaller producers, not just funding larger producers. So it's definitely, if people are possibly eligible, they should really look into it. There's not as much support that I know of for just producers, like producers that want to get certified organic, but a lot of certifiers will have different resources around that to also connect people to different other sorts of grant funding and funding options.
A question that popped into my head, I'm thinking specifically about someone I work with in the group coaching program who does farm, and obviously she grows their own fruit, but they also source fruits for their product from other farms. Would that type of farm business be eligible for a grant like this?
Possibly. So the way that this one works is it's tied to a commodity and then to a product. So, and you can have like a few, you don't want to have a million. You don't want to be like, we grow carrots, tomatoes, lettuce, and we make these like 20 products, fund us. No, like simplify and figure out like what you're going to get funding for, knowing that any marketing you do is helping your whole operation. If you're really pushing 3 apple jams, it's also going to get eyes on the blueberry jams. But so in that instance, say they say apples and we make a line of apple products, over 50% of the apples would have to be grown by them.
Okay.
But then they can source from other farms as well.
Awesome. And so, and I just want to make sure we're being really clear so people understand this as much as possible. So the funds, if the grant is awarded, go toward the packaging so like, for example, they've gotten the organic certification. Now they've got to update their labels and they want to put that, certification on there. This money can help fund that process.
Right. It doesn't fund the original certification process, but all the parts of the like marketing, promotions. I'm trying to think like hiring a sales manager so that there's someone to do your sales calls, delivery people to drop things at people's doors. If you do more of CSA style, like anything related to the growing, it doesn't cover. Everything kind of related to like the value add is a little bit of a way of thinking about it.
Okay. I love this so much. And so remind us again of the timeline for submission. So when does the application get released by the USDA?
Based on their schedule. So everything is with an asterisk. So what it's been the last 2 years, what we expect it to be this year is end of December, they announce it. And once they announce, they give you 90 days to submit an application. So that's then January, February, March, end of March, you submit the application.
So we will definitely put links to any resources that are currently available in the show notes for anybody who wants to learn more or kind of check out any of the details surrounding the grant or certification in general. So both for farmers and producers. But Ellen, I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you help folks with grant preparation and getting through the process?
Yeah. So there is two ways that I help do that. And really specifically around this grant, the value added producer grant, because of how much it ties into the other work that I do around organic and the marketing and things, just to be clear on that. I'm not a general grant writer. So that happens in two different ways. So I do one-on-one grant writing. And that's where I work one-on-one with people, really first to figure out what's a project worth funding, which is really important, really making sure, I mean, so much of what you do, Sarah, what are your cost of goods, making sure this is an actual value add for you. What's the project that's going to help you increase your sales? We have to get really clear on that first, and then go through and actually prepare an application and write it. So I do that on a one-on-one basis. And I also do a mentorship. So I started this last year and it was really successful. That the mentorship is where I teach you how to do it yourself. So I have templates that I use and so many different resources after doing this. I mean, there was a year where I made myself sick by the end of submitting the applications because I was so stressed out. So I've created definitely a way to attack this application kind of step by step. And in the mentorship, that's what I lead people through. And so that one's group calls. And then you get all my my tips on researching, my spreadsheets for building your budget. And then I actually do a review of your application before you submit it. So I can do a final eyes and give you exact where to change the argument and how to bolster the argument before you submit it to the USDA.
What an awesome resource. That is
Yeah.
amazing.
It's really fun. I love making money happen. It's like the most fun part of my job.
I love that. Please tell me that that's your company tagline, because it totally should be. This is amazing. So of course we're going to link to your website and let people know how to connect with you. If you can answer this question, I know the USDA does other types of grants, and for the producers who are not farmers who are listening, are there, I'm going to call them companion grants or like similar types of grants that they might want to check the USDA website for?
So I know that there are beginning farmer grants, like beginning organic grants. Unfortunately, I don't know of anything for if by producer you mean handler, like people
Yeah,
who have
sorry.
an
Yeah.
organic packaged product brand. I don't know. I have not come across any,
Okay.
unfortunately. There is a program through the USDA, the Agricultural Marketing Service, that's called the Local Food Promotion Program or the Farmers Market Promotion Program. There's kind of two parts of this other grant. And that, if you might be eligible for, if you're you're producing a product and you have like a strong network of where you're getting your ingredients from. So for example, say you are an elderberry syrup producer. I'm just thinking of someone I actually know of who hasn't applied for this grant, but maybe should. And you like work directly with elderberry farmers and are trying to help more people convert to being elderberry farmers because you then are able to purchase and process their elderberries. Like something like that
Okay.
would be possibly eligible for that program. So that's the
Okay.
USDA AMS, and it's called the LFPP, the Local Food Promotion Program.
I'm going to throw out an example here and see if this is the same type of business that would fall under that. So I work with fishermen and ranchers, and for example, and producers. So let's say we've got a producer who buys their fish from local sustainable fishermen, and they process that fish and package it and sell it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a similar type of situation that would fall under that grant?
Definitely. And all of these grants have, more details about like what makes you eligible or not, but on a blanket, I if I was that person, I would look into that grant.
Amazing.
And I'll do one other little like resource plug for people. There's a organization called Farm Raise now. They've been around, I think, for 2 or 3 years. They're online and it's for more the farmers again. But what they do is they're because there's all these agencies and all these different grants, which is why I say I'm not a full grant writer. I kind of focus on this value-added producer grant, but it's really hard to navigate then, like, what am I eligible for and not? And that's kind of the gap that they're trying to fill. So you can actually work with them just to figure out, like, here's the 10, 12, 15 grants that you are eligible for. And then you can figure out what you want to apply for from there.
That's super helpful. Thank you for that. Gosh, this has been so enlightening on so many levels, and we covered so much great information, from the benefits of becoming, organic certified. That's kind of a funny way to word it, but from the benefits to the costs to, opportunities for helping to cover those costs for farmers. And I am just so appreciative of your time and of the resources that you've mentioned and that we're going to be linking to again in the show notes. Ellen, before we officially sign off, where can people learn about you and the work that you do and connect with you?
Yeah. So I have my website, ellenrawley.com. I'm also on Instagram as a new thing. So definitely come there and tell me what you need to know, because you can help shape what that channel really delivers. I help people get certified organic, figure out that whole process, figure out the record keeping that they need in order to continue to stay certified. And if you're interested in that value-added producer grant, that is coming up quick. So you can actually, on my website, you can sign up to be notified when it gets released. And I'll start doing webinars that go more into the details and then start signing people up. I'm going to take up to 7 one-on-one clients this year and up to 15 folks in the mentorship, so that I can really get through all of the applications and give people good feedback. So if it's something you think you're interested in, definitely better to act sooner rather than later on that one.
Yeah, and we will do our best as well to keep our community up to date on that as well via you, Ellen. So thank you for that. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good one.
Have a good one, Sarah.